Hi, everyone. I am honored to introduce Melissa Scanlan, who I think I've been friends with for about 15 years now. Um, Melissa Scanlan is the Lynde B. Uihlein Endowed Chair in Water Policy and the Director of the Center of Water Policy at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee School of Freshwater Sciences. She's a professor in the School of Freshwater Sciences and affiliated faculty at the UW-Madison Law School. She also holds a bachelor's in world politics from the Catholic University of America, where she graduated Phi Beta Kappa, and she earned her JD and Master's of Science in Environmental Science, Policy and Management from the University of California, Berkeley. In her past, Melissa served as the Associate Dean of the Environmental Law Program and Director of the Environmental Law Center at Vermont Law School, and directed the Colloquium on Environmental Scholarship, a robust international forum for scholars to give and receive feedback on works in progress. She was also the founder and first director of Midwest Environmental Advocates, an environmental advocacy group here in Wisconsin. This is just one of the many social enterprises that Melissa has founded. And this long list ranges from the Center for Water Policy, the New Economy Law Center, and all sorts of other things. She's quite the social entrepreneur. The US State Department awarded her a Fulbright Senior Scholar position in Spain in 2019 to pursue research about Spanish cooperatives that are sustainability leaders. This research is what created the background for the book upon which her talk is based, Prosperity and the Fossil-Free Economy. I'm very excited to hear her talk. I already skimmed her book and it's quite lovely. And I'm thrilled that she's able to present this here. Before we get started, I just wanted to sort of talk about some of the administrative kind of things. So we'll save questions till the end of the talk. And to ask questions, you can either write a question in chat and I will monitor the chat and bring that up, or you can raise your hand if you want to sort of vocalize your questions. I'll monitor that as well. But that's how we'll do that, and we'll save that towards the end of her talk. So with that, take it away, Melissa.
Thanks for that great introduction. And you guys, thanks for hosting me today. Welcome to everyone who's joining us for this talk. It's fantastic to have worked so long on a book and then have you all come and listen to my talk and engage with it. It's wonderful. So I am going to ask you to just pause for a few seconds here, suspend your judging mind, and travel together to a near future, let's say 2035. This is how I open the book, with a dream from the future. And I'd like you to imagine a future where we have cleaner air and quieter streets, without combustion engines, without fossil fuel emissions from utilities, a future where we have vibrant markets supporting organic local farmers and producers, leading to healthier people, where we have affordable, clean, and reliable water due to investments in green infrastructure. I want you to think about a future where we have greater access to jobs and more stable middle-class neighborhoods due to a proliferation of worker-owned democratic enterprises. And a time when we have even more robust political life fueled by all of these democratic enterprises. So if you like that kind of future, I'd like you to just bear with me throughout this talk and think about how we're going to get there. The talk is going to proceed in 4 parts. I am going to bring us into our present challenge. I'll talk about sustainable business design. I will give you a couple examples of stories that I have from the path breakers in sustainability, and these are just 2 stories I'll share, and then close with some lessons that I've learned from the path breakers for a livable planet. You'll see my book here. There's a link to the website, and because you guys are so awesome in attending this talk today, Yale is giving everyone a 30% discount on the book. So if you purchase through them, use the code that was provided by our hosts. So I know it's not a fun topic to talk about climate change, but just go there with me for a while and look at it. According to the IPCC report, that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, this is the international consensus on the latest state of science. According to their most recent report in August 2021, major alterations in natural global systems are already well underway. And without major changes in our economic activities and our behaviors, our future is going to be bleak. CO2 levels are at the highest they've been in over 800,000 years, and they're rising. And human-caused greenhouse gases are already responsible for increasing temperatures 1.1 degrees Celsius since pre-industrial times. Now, that sounds like a really small amount. It's only 1 degree, right? But it's already resulting in major disruptions today. So climate disruption is here. We're seeing it in sea level rise, drought, heat, fire, intense storms. And we've all been dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. We're concerned about the economy. The climate crisis is something that's larger than all of those things and really does supersede them. In this summer alone, we've experienced traumas from Hurricane Ida, the Dixie fires in California, the excessive heat waves in the Pacific Northwest of the US and Canada, and the flooding in Germany. And that's just looking back at this summer. So we are now in it. Still, we can avoid the worst case scenarios of extreme suffering, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, if we stop burning fossil fuels and reduce greenhouse gases to zero as soon as possible. Action in this decade is critical. At the same time that we're pursuing those climate goals, the United Nations members all have agreed on the Sustainable Development Goals that are much, much broader, eliminating poverty and hunger, reducing inequalities. There are 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And the reason I'm showing you both of these things together, the Sustainable Development Goals and talking about climate change, is because the IPCC has told us that they're not able to model a future with a stable climate unless we deal with inequality and start reducing inequalities among people. And this is not just a global South, global North issue. This is also an issue within the United States itself. Here I want to show you research from Thomas Piketty's charts on inequality that shows the top 10% of the people in the United States and what percent of income they possess. So you can see that starting around 1980, the top 10% took a greater and greater share of income in the United States, and topping off over 50% in 2007. So while we have been seeing incredible growth in the stock market and in GDP in our country, inequality has been growing. And that's because the benefits of the stock market disproportionately go to those who invest rather than those who rely on their labor to earn money. And not only is wealth disproportionate in our country based on class, but it's also unequal based on race and ethnicity. In 2016, the average white family held 7 times more wealth than a Black family and 5 times more than a Hispanic family. So we need to look at the root cause of this rising inequality and our inability to address climate change to date. And I want you to focus on the dominant business model that is animating our economy, and that's investor-owned corporations. They do really, really well what they're designed to do. Their top priority is producing financial returns for shareholders without any real commitment to larger goals. And this is generating a lot of inequality and leading to these wealth gaps. But I don't want to leave you there. I want you to think about a future that is prosperous. This is a picture from New Delhi's India Gate. And I think it shows us the silver lining of the pandemic. When you contrast October 2019 to April 2020, and you see what an immediate clearing of the air looks like when we stop using combustion engines. So yes, the climate emergency is frightening, but we can have immediate improvements in our quality of life by moving off of fossil fuels. And I want you to hold this picture in your mind as you think about that. What if instead of reducing suffering, which is the focus of the climate scientists, we could instead focus on prosperity and design a better economy that allows for greater shared prosperity? So part of this book is talking about this connection between environmental law and business law that oftentimes we don't really see. And the conclusion I've really come to is that business law is essential for sustainability outcomes. We have a 40-year history of environmental, actually a 50-year history now of environmental law in this country. And it's really good at surfacing and correcting excess pollution, but it's extremely poor at transforming the economic activity it regulates. And it is really weak medicine when stacked up against the dominant business structure of the investor-owned corporation. The primary way that people kind of nibble around the edges of the dominant business structure is through sustainability reporting. And so in the book, I take kind of a deep dive into this. And the Global Reporting Initiative is the most widely used sustainability reporting platform in the world. Almost every major corporation uses some form of sustainability report. So if sustainability reporting was the way to transform business, we would be seeing it already. In fact, the Global Reporting Initiative's corporate leadership group took a look at what was happening with environmental outcomes, and they found that reporting on sustainability by our major corporations isn't resulting in the outcomes that we want to see in terms of improvements to the environment. And the reason that the conclusion they came to was that sustainability reporting is not getting at the fundamental design of business. And it's the business model that is really a problem in terms of economic outcomes. So what I'm arguing for in the book is that we need a more democratic economy, and we need businesses that are of the people, by the people, and for the people. We need more owners. We need democratic workplaces that weave sustainability and deep decarbonization into the core purpose of the business. And they're focused on improving communities where they operate and sharing prosperity more broadly. So what are these democratic businesses? I focus on cooperatives in the book. So these are enterprises that can be for-profit or not-for-profit. They have a purpose based on ethics, values, and principles. They operate in most sectors of the economy in most countries of the world. So you have insurance cooperatives and energy cooperatives, worker-owned, farmer-owned, consumer-owned. Some of you, you're in Madison, maybe you're members of the Willie Street Co-op. If you invest through Vanguard, you're part of a co-op. If you get your insurance through USAA because you're a military family, you're part of a co-op. More people in the US are co-op members than owners of stock, but we often don't think about this sector and what it can bring to advancing principles of shared economic prosperity and environmental sustainability. The really interesting thing about co-ops that I found is that the International Co-op Alliance defines a shared set of values and principles that co-ops all across the world can incorporate into their business model. So some examples of these shared values and principles are the concept of every person who's a member of the co-op getting one vote, regardless of how much money is invested in the co-op by that person. A principle of cooperating with other cooperatives to help build that sector, expressing solidarity between trading partners and between people with more and less financial resources, and very specifically a concern for the community. And the concern for the community is the locus of this concept of sustainable environmental development that co-ops can be incorporating into their overall purpose. So what I argue for in the book is that we need to be building a triple bottom line of protecting the environment, society, and the financial health of the enterprise into the overarching purpose of the business and influencing the day-to-day practices. There are currently no laws in the EU or the US that require investor-owned corporations to have any kind of social or environmental purpose. There are some laws in the EU that require this of cooperatives. In the US, we don't have those laws, but we do have flexibility to incorporate an environmental purpose into the structure of the co-op. We have a lot more freedom to do that than with an investor-owned corporation. So the bottom line that I have taken from the research is that we need to be articulating a strong purpose in corporate governance documents and in cooperative governance documents, and accounting for it through non-financial audits. A lot of people are focused on B Corp certification, and this is a really interesting way of expressing sustainability through a certification process. The B Lab is the prominent entity that does this. And there is some research indicating that a combination of being B Corp certified and employee owned appears to have the strongest positive results for stakeholders. And I have an example of Just Coffee Cooperative in the book that has gone for this certification and has found it really, really helpful. But the certifications are not everything. And so they don't necessarily, they can be helpful, but they don't necessarily get to the core DNA of the business. So just briefly, there are a lot of different sources that lawyers can turn to for sustainable business design. And the top is through private environmental governance, looking at these international co-op alliance values and principles and incorporating them into the articles of incorporation and bylaws of the co-op. There are some public laws in the EU that are supportive of sustainable business design. And in the US, we would be looking at federal, state, and municipal level laws for this. Many of the laws in the US really don't have this, so we're very much relying on private environmental governance in the US. So let's move from there to talk about the opportunity ahead. We need to redesign our economy to move off fossil fuels and meet the Sustainable Development Goals. And in order to do that, I am urging you to think about what the best business structure is that's equipped to pursue these multiple goals. And I'm trying to, in this book, not only write for people who are studying law, but for entrepreneurs and founders of new businesses, and to the retiring baby boomers who own 2.3 million businesses in this country, employing 25 million Americans. So there are federal laws that encourage converting those businesses to worker-owned cooperatives. And I'm hoping that the path breakers that I highlight in the book give baby boomers some ideas of ways that they can transition their business to something that's worker owned and really locks in a sustainability mission. There are a lot of different entry points into this book. For those of you who are really into theory and law, you would be going into the first part of the book, and maybe you'd read it all the way through. But for some people, you want to jump right to the strategy, and that's in part 2 of the book. So what I'm doing is looking at the key economic sectors that have the biggest impact in terms of greenhouse gases and that we need to prioritize to move off of fossil fuels. So I have chapters focused on energy, food and agriculture, water, finance, and trade. So you can choose one of those or read them all. I'd be delighted, obviously, if you read the whole thing, but you can take the book in pieces. For today's purpose, I just want to focus on energy. Globally and in the US, greenhouse gases to extract, process, and combust fossil fuels make up about 70% of the greenhouse gases. So this is the biggest area for change. And what the energy transition could look like if we were entering into it is more jobs related to energy efficiency and conservation, retiring all fossil fuel electric generating plants that don't capture their greenhouse gases, developing renewable energy capacity in the least environmentally destructive ways, incentivizing electric vehicles, making sure that we have storage systems for this renewable energy. And most critical to the piece in the book, emphasizing democratic ownership and participation models that reduce energy poverty. So why do we need to think about the business model? I'm arguing that we need to disrupt business as usual, and that renewable energy cooperatives are a type of enterprise that lends itself most readily to meeting multiple goals. And tying this back to the Sustainable Development Goals, renewable energy cooperatives can be promoting access to affordable and reliable energy, combating climate change, providing decent work for people, reducing inequalities, supporting sustainable cities, and promoting responsible consumption. How do they do this? I've got a lot of examples in the book. I'm going to talk about just 2 path breakers. One is from Spain. It's Som Energia. And a professor, along with about 150 students and neighbors, founded this co-op in 2010. This was Spain's first nationwide modern renewable energy co-op, and it has grown tremendously over the past decade. They provide consumer members 100% renewable energy. They're involved in both producing the renewables and commercializing it, meaning selling it to the end consumer. And as of this summer, they were producing 18.5 gigawatt hours per year of renewable electricity and had grown to almost 72,000 members. They've reduced the barriers to entry by allowing people to join for 100 euros. And they see what they're doing as really mission oriented, not just providing an energy service, but they're trying to engage members in what they see as transforming a transformative social movement to break what they call the existing energy oligopoly. Part of what they do that's really fantastic is they use a mix of highly developed participatory democracy strategy that mixes online participation with in-person meetings. They have local groups of members that get together to share stories about how to engage in greater energy efficiency, and they band together to put out requests for proposals to get solar power put on people's buildings. And then they pair that with national in-person meetings for their members. They also provide trainings. They have an energy school where people come together to get more involved in learning about this transition to renewable energy. So they're really focused on democratic participation, and they're doing it well. The next pathbreaker I want to talk about is in the US. And to give you a little context for that, I want to just briefly talk about the history of US electricity co-ops. During the Great Depression, only about 10% of rural America actually had access to electricity. There were 7 holding companies that dominated private power generation, and they did not have any interest in electrifying rural America, even when the federal government gave incentives. So part of the New Deal to pull the country out of the Depression was this vision to electrify rural America. And the part of the New Deal legislation and executive orders launched the rural electric co-ops as locally controlled entities, mainly run by farmers. Today, we have that legacy of 900 electric distribution co-ops and 63 power supply co-ops spread over half of the land base of the country and serving 1 in 8 Americans. Now, a lot of the supply of electricity for the co-ops today is dominated by coal, 40%, because of investments that were made in the late 70s and 80s. So those are near retirement, and there's a big opportunity to move those electric co-ops off of coal and to increase renewables. They've already been increasing the percentage of renewables used by co-ops, but we need policies to accelerate that pace. Even in the absence of policies, we find people who are path breakers, entities that are. And so I highlight for you here Cobb EMC and Green Energy EMC. Cobb was born in the New Deal era. It's a traditional electric distribution co-op serving about 200,000 members in Georgia. It's right outside Atlanta. It's in the top 10 largest electric co-ops in the US, in the top 3 for power reliability and for low rates. And at the same time, it is providing the most megawatts in solar of any US cooperative. That was in 2019, soon to be eclipsed. They had the largest percentage of solar of any Eastern co-op, 40% of their power being generated by solar on their best days. And they really emphasize the cooperative values and principles as a motivating structure for them, and the fact that they're a nonprofit. They also emphasize democratic participation of their members, and that is demonstrated by how many members are coming to their annual meeting and voting. So in 2019, they had 3,200 members come to their annual meeting and participate in it and vote. And they had over 10,000 people who were at their annual picnic where the meeting was hosted. So they are really focused on community building as well as providing renewable energy at the extremely low rates that they can provide it at. And one of their strategies, because there are no policies within Georgia that actually promote renewables or would encourage this, one of their strategies is that they participate in another co-op called Green Energy that brokers the contracts for renewables for all of the 38 Georgian distribution co-ops. So they've got these different platforms developed where they can participate in this renewable energy revolution. And they've figured out ways to do this without having policies in place set by the government. They could do so much more if we had the policies right. But this is a good example of showing how the private sector can move ahead, even when faced with reticence by public elected officials. I'm going to close it there and open things up for questions. I just want to leave you with the final thought that we really can mitigate climate disruption and create more owners and share wealth more equitably when we are thinking about the business model and investing more in co-ops as a dominant business model in our economy. And I'd urge us to think collaboratively and to be working internationally to do this. Some of the lessons that I've gained from spending time with the sustainability pathbreakers, I sum up in the book and go into a lot more detail in their chapters. But I want to leave you with just kind of the bottom line that the pathbreakers all tend to be very thoughtful in terms of their legal design for their entity, where they're using their articles of organization and bylaws to incorporate very explicitly the triple bottom line of having a sustainability purpose. They use democratic governance as a way to increase power amongst the members of the co-op and voice. Often they're using hybrid membership options, so you might have consumer members and worker members coexisting within a co-op. They use salary policies and caps on the highest and lowest paid in order to create more equity across the co-op. And they set aside funds for education and charity. So instead of profits going to shareholders, they have surplus that goes into funds that supports greater prosperity in the broader community where they're operating. So I'm going to end the share screen now and look forward to discussing with you all.
Melissa, thank you very much for that lovely presentation and for sharing a note of optimism in a time when things don't always look optimistic. As people think of their questions, I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative to just start the ball rolling. I'm interested in what specific policy recommendations you might have for the Biden administration that flow from your analyses. Right now, the big infrastructure bill is being debated. What kinds of changes might be worked in there in either the bill or its administration that might sort of give weight to some of your recommendations? It could be not just the infrastructure bill, but some of his proposed financial restructurings. He had an executive order on America's supply chain. Any of these things, what kinds of inputs would you have if you could be an advisor right there?
Yeah, thanks for asking that, because it takes the book out of the past and puts it directly in the immediate moment. So the Biden administration has these goals to move off of fossil fuels and invest in infrastructure, including broadly defined infrastructure, societal needs like childcare. And when you read about these goals, you read about tax credits to incentivize homeowners and businesses switching to solar. You might read about streamlining local permitting processes, rewarding utilities for adding renewable energy. You might hear about goals like half of all new cars sold are going to be electric by 2030. But you will not hear a prominent discussion about the businesses that are best equipped to make this transition. So I think this is an opportunity and a real need to have cooperative surface as the leading option for business design. And so the policy modification that I would add to what's going on right now is to add that business model layer to this overall restructuring. And just like in 1935, when President Franklin Roosevelt did this, he used an executive order to establish the Rural Electrification Administration, created a government structure that could help advance cooperatives, the formation of cooperatives, which led to direct benefits to rural America and economic development based on being electrified across the country. So we could be doing that as well in this transition. We could be incorporating supports for cooperatives, technical support, financial support for cooperatives so that they become a dominant business model in this transition.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Samudu.
Thank you, Steph. Thank you so much, Melissa, for this presentation. I can't wait to get hold of a copy of your book. Um, I was wondering, since we have law students in the audience, whether you could talk a little bit about the role of law students and whether you have any advice for them, because we are dealing with a climate emergency, and there are lots of things that lawyers can do and have to do, and the current generation will be at the receiving end of many of these negative consequences. So any advice you can give to law students would be most welcome. Thank you.
Yeah. So I've been an environmental lawyer for over 20 years and spent over a decade, the past decade, as an environmental law professor. So I'm going to, of course, tell you to immerse yourself in environmental law for sure, right? But the reason I wrote this book is because I saw the limits of environmental law. And I would encourage you to pair your interest in environmental issues and becoming, the go-to expert on environmental law, to pair that with a solid understanding of business law and knowing how you can advise your clients on corporate formation and governance. There aren't many people who are experts in social enterprise design, such as cooperatives, employee stock options, B Corp. You could do the world a service with a deep understanding of this area. You could start by reading my book and then taking courses in this area and becoming the person who can do this. You will need to educate your clients about the importance of legal design and their options related to cooperatives and other triple bottom line businesses, because this really isn't taught very extensively in business school. Whenever I look at business school curricula, I see that there's a huge gap at most business schools in terms of teaching people about how to start and run these kind of social enterprises. So as a lawyer, that's going to be part of your role, is explaining these options to your clients and really having a deep understanding about how corporate governance influences environmental outcomes.
It looks like someone's typing something, but I'm not sure. I'll just wait a little bit.
All right. Maybe we should talk about local
Yeah, because that's what I was going to ask about, local governments.
Yeah, because you are in Madison, and so you've got a local government that's already doing quite a bit related to cooperatives. So kind of in the middle of the presentation, I talked about different sources of sustainable business design, and one of those areas is at the municipal level. And what I can highlight a couple different examples from the US and from Spain, just to put what the US is doing, US cities are doing in perspective compared to the Spanish municipalities. So in 2014, the New York City Council created a $1.2 million fund to grow worker-owned cooperatives. And a couple of years later, they had already grown from 12 to 80 worker-owned co-ops in New York City because of that investment of money and technical support from the city. So they're seen as a pretty big, like, bright spot in the co-op generation sector and what municipalities can do. Madison in 2016 launched a cooperative development program as well. And they offer similarly funding and technical support with a priority for co-ops that are formed by people of color. They're using co-ops as a strategy to deal with inequalities that are persisting based on race in Madison. But they started with a much more modest budget. They started with $600,000 a year for 5 years. And they have had really modest results as well. Let's go to Spain and look at what they have done as a contrast. In 2019, the city of Barcelona put 24 million euros into supporting cooperatives and other social economy initiatives, funding, training, advice. So they have like serious money put behind this sector. And you see the results in the proliferation of cooperatives in Barcelona. On a smaller scale, but very similar, in 2019, Valencia in Spain budgeted 6 million euros. That's about $6.8 million at that in 2019 to support co-ops. And they have an extremely robust worker co-op ecosystem in Valencia. They have over 2,400 worker-owned co-ops employing 75,000 people in that small autonomous community. That's more worker-owned cooperatives in that community than the entire United States. So their local government is really having an impact on the proliferation of co-ops in that region.
Thank you. So first, are there any path breakers in the Midwest or Great Lakes region that people should be aware of? Would there need to be state law modifications to allow for energy cooperatives to operate in areas currently in a monopoly market? And also, did you come across, first one was from Susan Mudd, second one was from Timothy Sperlin, third one is from Pam Porter. In your research, did you come across innovations in real estate? There are many baby boomers who own significant housing stock in our retirement and looking to downsize as a way to transfer this into a more cooperative ownership kind of system.
So the first one I think was, are there any path breakers from the Midwest? Right? Is that the first one?
Yep.
Let's start with that. Yes, there are. And you'll find stories of cooperatives that might be familiar to you. The Just Coffee Co-op is one that I feature in the chapter on trade, talking about how they have structured that business. And they grew from, just such a micro business where they were selling coffee on their bikes to having a national distribution system set up. And they're still based in Madison. The other one that is Midwestern is Crop, which is mostly known to you probably through their common brand called Organic Valley. If you've had Organic Valley dairy products, you know about the Crop Co-op, or you've purchased something from the Crop Co-op. They have a really inspiring story about using the cooperative model to counteract what was happening in the 1980s with foreclosures on farms, and how they were no longer going to be waiting for the federal government or any government to bail them out. They figured that bonding together and participating in an organically focused co-op was going to be their greatest chance of survival, and they were right. They were able to use that co-op model in order to provide incomes that were more stable for the participants in the co-op, and they've grown to have over 2,000 members across the country. That co-op was the first organic foods company to gross $1 billion in revenues. So from a purely financial perspective, they're wildly successful, even though they've had financial trouble. I'm not saying they have been a panacea in that regard, but they're just, they have been able to expand the market for organic dairy products really tremendously and provide benefits to their members. There was a question about specific changes to Wisconsin law, and I am not really able to answer that because that gets into the specifics of one state. I try to talk in the book about the different jurisdictions, US federal law and some state law, but I didn't focus specifically on Wisconsin, so I wouldn't count myself an expert on Wisconsin specific co-op law to answer that question. And then was there one more, Steph?
One more was about real estate and sort of transferring of homes from people looking to downsize to a more equitable system of cooperative ownership.
I don't focus on housing in the book because I was trying to zero in on the top sources of greenhouse gas emissions and identify path breakers in those parts of the economy. But I am familiar with housing co-ops, and that is a strategy that's been used across the United States and in Spain to lower the costs of being a homeowner. And there are some really interesting examples in Vermont where housing cooperatives are being used as a strategy for low-income housing that is fully moved off of fossil fuels. So they also have a stake in solar power that's providing the energy for that housing co-op.
Super cool. I like Melissa do some work with sort of sustainable businesses, but because I teach contracts, I look at the contract kind of angle, and I've gotten involved in a project at UW on sustainable procurement. So it's a system-wide working group on sustainable procurement, and there's two different cooperative aspects to it. And I'm just curious about your thoughts on this, is that should a university, if they're trying to do sustainable procurement, that is buying both goods and energy services, et cetera, for the university as a large institutional purchaser, should they prioritize in terms of expanding co-ops from your perspective, purchasing from co-ops? So for example, workers' cooperatives that are producing a certain type of goods, is that where the focus should be? Or should the focus instead be on joining purchasing cooperatives, which is a form of purchasing that expands institutional purchasers' ability to have more sway in the sort of market? I mean, I suppose one could do both, but I was just wondering your thoughts on how to prioritize in terms of
Yeah, well, I'm glad you're involved in that. It's good to hear about. And I don't think you could go wrong with either of those options. So being part of a purchasing co-op to lower the cost of doing business can be a great strategy. And if you are specifically prioritizing purchasing from worker-owned co-ops, you'll be part of that virtuous cycle of having a broader impact beyond just this, your specific environmental sustainability goal, but supporting businesses that are also involved in creating more owners and more democratic participation and probably a better quality of life. So I think the choice of business that you are procuring things from at that level can really make a difference. And institutional purchasers are hugely important. The evergreen cooperatives, I don't write about them in the book, but they're a great, more local example from Cleveland, where they have formed a whole series of worker-owned cooperatives that are anchored by institutions like the universities and healthcare institutions in Cleveland that are purchasing from those worker-owned co-ops. And it's created this virtuous cycle that has allowed more worker owners to exist in a part of Cleveland that really has suffered from extremely high unemployment and racial disparities. So it's definitely, what you're talking about is a really tried strategy in Cleveland, and I think you should pursue it at Madison as well.
That's great to hear.
Yeah.
We have another question in the chat from Jeff Kwiatkowski. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Are there any pathbreakers currently serving in the US Congress or the state level championing or welcoming this message? Are there folks that we should be supporting politically that think about these things?
Oh, thanks for the question. Mark Pocan from Wisconsin actually co-chaired the co-op caucus in Congress, and I think is a leader in that regard. So for those of you who are tuning in from Wisconsin, give him contact him and tell him you're supporting co-ops if you are, and give him some support, because yes, he's been able to raise awareness about this and could probably benefit from hearing feedback from constituents.
Thank you.
Melissa, sorry, this is nothing to do with the current book, but do you have another book project in hand that you can tell us about?
What's the next one on the horizon? Yale is wondering that too. No, I don't have another book in hand right now. I'm just really happy to see this one over the finish line. And I think that, this book has a little something for everyone, depending on how deeply you want to get into this. If you just want to pick up the book and live in the dream in the utopian world, you'll spend time at the entry point to the book, thinking about what the world could look like in 15 years if we really focused on sustainable business design. If you want to get into the theories and laws, you can enter the book through part 1 and get more into the legal design that exists out there. And if you want to just have some stories of people who are actually making changes, that's part 2 of the book. And if you want to read about water, you can just read about water and people who are path breakers in that area. If you want to read about finance, you can just read about that as well. I mean, I obviously encourage people to read the whole book, but I think you can take it in little pieces depending on your mood and your inclination. So I hope that there are pieces of this that can resonate with almost anyone who picks it up. And we should give the code for the discount for Yale that people have for attending this. We should maybe put that in the chat in case people want to order the book through Yale University Press. Thanks for coming to the talk and for engaging with me today.
Yes, thank you, everyone. And thank you for this really wonderful and inspiring talk. It's nice to hear some good news or at least some good messages during this time. Thank you,
That's
Melissa.
right. Yeah, thank you, Melissa. And thank you, Steph, for moderating.
Yeah, thanks for hosting and for sponsoring this through your human rights program. It's really great to be part of that.